I'm in one of my favorite spots on our church land, right under this pecan tree or pecan tree, whatever you say, however you say it. But this is one of my favorite spots to just come and chill and hang out and experience the presence of God. And although I don't get to do this a lot because the weather here in Georgia is quite unpredictable, like this morning it was 40-something degrees outside in the middle of spring, mind you. But this is one of my most favorite places to come and just pray and get alone with God. And so I want to talk to you today for the next few moments about a pastor that actually prays. All right, let's jump right in. I am your host, Shane Tarpley. This is Small Town Pastor Podcast. We are in season number 2, and I am super excited. This will probably be the last podcast of this season until I return back in July or even on this podcast for August. I am being graced with the gift of a sabbatical. Starting next month, I'm taking about 5 weeks off from our church. I'm really excited about that. My entire family's taking that off with us. And listen, Pastor, if you've been in the grind for longer than 4 to 5 years and you've not taken an extended time off, you need to be talking to somebody in your church about doing that. You need to be setting that thing up because, listen, I didn't know how much I needed it until a pastor friend of mine that I lean on heavily. He's been in the trenches way longer than I have, and just an amazing man of God, sat down with me, or rather over a phone call, and just said, listen, Shane, it is time for you to take a sabbatical. So listen, Pastor, if you're watching this and you're feeling worn out, you've been in the trenches for years on end, just day in, day out, on the grind, doing the thing, visits, praying for people, preaching sermon after sermon after sermon, you have got to take some extended time off to reset your spirit, to rejuvenate yourself, and to rest. You have got to rest. And if you need some help, I'd love for you to send me an email at pastorshane@myverb.church, or you can comment on this video right here. I'd love to help you set that up because it is super essential for the well-being of not only your health, your family's health, your marriage, your mental health, your spiritual health, but for the health of your church too. If your church wants to grow and wants to be healthy, it wants to have new ministries being birthed from it and vision being cast on a regular basis, then they've got to set you up for success so that you can help them grow spiritually and be successful in your community as well. But that's not what I came to talk to you about. But I will not apologize for taking a sabbatical or preaching that pastors need to rest. So I want to talk to you today about pastors that actually pray. Come on, somebody. Pastors that actually pray. Listen, pastors, I told you from the beginning of this thing, this is not about leadership, although I may sprinkle in some leadership from time to time, but this is about you, the small town pastor, not the small church pastor, but the small town pastor who is in the trenches day in and day out. And I know, because I am one of those small town pastors. Our town, when we planted, had probably, I think the Barna poll said it was about 4,400 people, okay? That was 6 years ago. In that span of time, now that was in the city limits, okay? So in that span of time, our community has grown substantially. I just checked the polls the other week, and we have grown to over 10,000 people. In the outliers, we are pushing 16,000 people, and that is amazing. Did you know that most churches will only reach 1% or less of their community? 1% or less. So let me give you some perspective, okay? If you're a church in a town of 400,000 people, all right, that's pretty large, and you're running 1,000, that's not even 1%. That's great growth for your church, and that's something to celebrate, something we don't take lightly. But did you know most churches reach less than 1% of their community? And so listen, small town pastor, I want to encourage you. Stop looking at these churches that are running 1,000, 2,000 people on a Sunday morning, and start looking at the percentage of growth and reach that their church is in relation to their community. So listen, if you're in a church of 4,000 people and you run 200 people, guess what? You're over the 1% mark. That ought to give you some encouragement. I'll never forget, we planted through an organization called ARC, Association of Related Churches, birthed out of the Church of Highlands, with Pastor Chris Hodges, Pastor Dino Rizzo, amazing people, love them dearly. My coach is an ARC coach and all of that, so I won't get into all those nuances. But let me just tell you, we had some people from ARC show up to our very first launch service. We had about 155, 160 people, something like that, in our small town, all right? He showed up, he said, Shane, I don't know if you realize, but those numbers in this town, in this community, are equivalent to some of our other churches in larger metropolitan cities where they will launch 400, 500, 600 people. So, Pastor, you've got to put things into perspective for you. And part of that perspective is spending time in prayer. You didn't think I was going to get there. Spending time in prayer. Prayer has got to be the essential boiler room, the engine room, the coals, the fire of your existence. If you don't have prayer, Pastor, you don't have anything. You can do all of the work in the church that you think is expected of you. You can print bulletins. You can write sermons. You can hold leadership. You can pour into people. You can lead the choir. You can lead the Sunday morning singing of the congregation. You can do the offering. You can do communion. How much more do you want me to go through? You can lead outreach. You can set up events, all that stuff, until you are completely run dry and beaten down and you are done. But you know, somebody told me, people don't burn out because of the amount of things they do. They burn out because they forget why they do them. And you know what that goes back to? Having a vision for your ministry, having a vision for your life. And you know where that vision comes from? Spending time with God. And you know what that's called? Prayer. See, I want to get back to pastors who actually spend time in prayer. I know that's like an oxymoron, because pastors ought to be the most praying people, not just in a church, but in a community and in any area. But pastors, we have got to get back to the place where we spend time with God. Unhindered, unadulterated time with God. And listen, I tell my church all the time, if you do Bible reading plans, then kudos to you. But you cannot let that Bible reading plan take the place of you just spending time on your knees with your face on the ground with God. It just can't happen. It cannot. And the vision, if you don't have prayer time with God, quality prayer time. Listen, Pastor, let me tell you, if you're bivocational or if you're full-time, it doesn't matter. You are the vision driver of your church. Nobody else can have the vision for your church but you. Vision has to be cast. It has to be articulated on a regular basis. I had a pastor speaking to me. He said, vision is like air in a tire. Guess what happens? Through the course of seasons changing and temperature changing and climate in your church changing, it begins to leak. And if you don't put air back in the tire, you're going to be running flat. And pretty soon, when you drive on flat tires, you warp the wheels, the rims, the axles, all that stuff. Losing the vision, Pastor, losing the vision will totally destroy the vehicle and the mechanism to what God is trying to do inside your church. Listen, you're not so powerful that you're going to get in God's way of His will. He'll just use somebody else to make His will happen. And that is a startling conviction for me. That means I've got to spend so much quality time in prayer. I had another pastor speaking of this, and she said, it was Pastor Devin Wallace from Redemption. I love them dearly. The Wallace family is absolute amazing, dear to my heart. But she said this, a church without prayer, or she said a prayerless church is a barren church. Now you think about that, Pastor. Like in our church, it's not a massive mega church, But in our church, I want vision. I want ministries. I want reaching people in our community to continually be birthed day in and day out. So how do I do that? I have to lead my leaders through prayer and vision. And the only way that I'm going to continue to get vision from God is to spend time with Him. And prayer, and Pastor, I hope that this is convicting and challenging to you, because in my own life, it has been a massive conviction point. Like, I have really had to learn that spending time and posting stuff on social media about our church, advertising, doing little cute videos about different events coming up, spending time with our leaders and all that stuff, all that is well and great. But if you think that's going to grow your church, it's not. It'll contribute to the growth of your church. But if you don't have a foundation of prayer set aside in your daily life to eradicate all the toxic and the task and the nuances of what you think you ought to be doing, you are going to lose out on one of the greatest callings that God has ever put on somebody, and that is the call to be a pastor and shepherd. So, I want to encourage you. I don't know if you can hear, but there's a lot of building going on around us. This is our church land. We've got 15 acres here. I'm super excited about us starting our building process. By the way, that didn't happen without prayer. I would come here as soon as we purchased this land. I would come to this land every single morning for nearly 2 years straight and pray, God, please help us start building. We've owned this land now for a little over 3 years. The process to start building is great. There's a lot of new construction going on. But what am I getting at? There's some new things that God wants to birth in your spirit. There's some new things that God wants to build inside of your church, inside of the ministry He's called you to lead. But it cannot happen until you lay the foundation for prayer. So I encourage you, small town pastor, there's great expectations being placed on you. Sometimes you feel like you're everything from the leader of the house to the janitor of the bathrooms, and you do everything in between. You teach Sunday school, you teach Wednesday night, you hold choir rehearsals, you clean the bathrooms, you sweep off the porches of your church steps and all this kind of stuff. You go out and maybe you even rent things to reline parking lots, and you do all this stuff. You're the handyman, you're the Mr. Fixer, all that. But listen, none of that matters unless you have an absolute relationship and connection with God. So don't lose that connection. Don't lose that foundation. Keep laying the foundation larger and further every single day through prayer. And let's become pastors who actually pray. I love you. I'm so grateful that you tuned in. I'm thankful that you support this ministry and this podcast. Until next time, get some rest, rejuvenate, relax, and spend time in prayer with God. Have a great day.